From Copenhagen University, Professor Mouritsen has inspired many seaweed lovers with all his books and amazing papers. Professor Ole Mouritsen is a physicist and professor of gastrophysics at culinary food innovation at the University of Copenhagen. With a background in physical chemistry and biophysics, he has authored several scientific books and about 400 papers. He has received prestigious awards including the DuPont Nutrition and Health Science Medal for Excellence in Food Science. He also a Japanese Cuisine Goodwill Ambassador and President of the Danish Gastronomical Academy. His work focuses on the gastrophysics of umami, seaweeds, and cephalopods, as well as vegetables. In his spare time, he cooks, collaborates with chefs, furthers his knowledge and of all aspects of food, and writes articles and books about the science of food and taste. Thank you, Professor Mouritsen.
Thank you very much, Valerie, for this introduction. And I have to apologize that we're starting late. I think it's kind of my mistake. I had a wonderful video I wanted to show you in the beginning of my presentation, and I tried to delete it and couldn't delete it, and I couldn't really get it on back. What we were supposed to see was a wonderful video of how carrageenan in seaweed, how it absorbs water and how it grows. And maybe you can see it on my screen. You're going to come over here after the presentation. Susan invited me to give this talk, and I said I don't have much to say about seaweed, really, not anything new anyway. So she gave me this talk, the secret flavors of seaweeds, and I added something, Susan. I hope you don't mind. They're not so secret because they're not really secret, and you already heard something about them. The reason why I'm interested in seaweed, or there are many reasons why I'm interested in seaweed, but particularly now I'm interested in seeing how seaweeds and increasing the consumption of seaweeds can help us to eat more green and more sustainable. That is, we're told to eat all this green stuff, think vegetables, we don't. And if you ask people why they don't do it, it's because, say, the taste. There's an issue with the taste. And this is where I think seaweed can come in. We already talked a bit about taste. And I'd like to take the opportunity to make an announcement. I have a book coming out later this year written together with the chef. And it's trying to put seaweeds in a proper place when it comes to consumption of sustainable green food that comes from the bottom of the food web. So along with plants, we have the algae, including the seaweed, and also the fungi. And you can read more about that in this book, where we try to put seaweeds back on the scene. And of course, as you probably all know, which also transpired from the earlier discussion, we can not just say seaweeds. I mean, there are 12,000 different kinds of seaweed, and it's really unfair just to say seaweed. And if you talk about the difference between these different seaweeds, just in terms of genetics, the genetic distance, if you may allow me to say that, between, say, green and brown seaweeds is just as big as between animals and plants. So it's a very diverse, very heterogeneous group of stuff, which of course makes it extremely interesting from the point of view of gastronomy and cooking, because there's so many things that you can go and look for. And if one thing doesn't appeal to you, you'll probably find another one. So in a way, it's at least maybe even more rich than plants. Now, what about taste? Now we have an issue with language. In the English language, we have flavor, and flavor is really the sensory, or that's the composite of different sensory cues. So both smell, that is odor, taste, probably also mouthfeel, and some even include the other two basic senses when we talk about the taste of seaweeds. And all these sensory cues are important if people are going to enjoy seaweeds. And I can't help, and now we have two representatives of the Japanese community here. In Japan, if you sort of try to figure out how come that Japanese appreciate seaweeds, you have heard about dashi, you're going to hear more about dashi, you're also going to hear about umami, but the mouthfeel of seaweeds is a thing that always come up top, and there are a whole lot of different names, expressions for mouthfeel which we don't have. And if you count the number of terms for mouthfeel in languages like ours in this part of the world, And compared to the Japanese vocabulary, the Japanese have about 4 times as many words for something where we hardly have a word. And probably many of you, those who are Danes, you may not even use the word mouthfeel or mundfølelse. So that's a thing that comes in as a proper thing, and Christina also mentioned to it that the appreciation of mouthfeel is something you should worry about. So now I'm going to just, since Susan asked me to give kind of a general presentation, let me just give you examples of mouthfeel. Probably all of you have had this seaweed made from Yasi wakame, which is made from Daria wakame. I think most people appreciate it because it's crunchy. It may have all sorts of odors and flavors you do not like. I don't like all the stuff with all the chili in, but it's crunchy. People who eat sushi, if they eat in a proper way, they also realize that the seaweed, the nori, the seaweed paper you wrap around rice, it has to be crisp. As long as it's been sitting close to the wet rice for a while, it's getting soggy. So the proper way of presenting sushi like this, cold sushi, is that you have to have the seaweed, it has to be untouched with anything that is humid, put on the rice and eat it right away. And if you don't do that, it's sort of lost. So that's also texture, and also texture contrast between the crisp outside and the soft and moist interior. Here's an example for you mentioned, Christina, about boiling seaweeds and this wonderful green appearance. You can also find that with sort of tedious Danish bladderwrack, which is completely overlooked. But if you blanch it, many of the brown pigments are broken down and the chlorophyll comes forward. It's just within a fraction of a second, it goes light green, and it goes beautifully in a salad. The same thing you can do with another seaweed from this part of the world. This is winged kelp, which I think is a candidate that is almost can compete with wakame, and has some gastronomic applications quite similar. You may see here it actually has some structure. Many seaweeds don't have much structure, but it has a string, and the same is actually true with wakame. And this string, which is valued both in Korean and also Japanese cuisine as something that has a different texture, so you can put it in vinegar and it is sort of acidic, and then it's crunchy, it's nice crunchy. You can also candy it. So this is a little example of a piece of candy where you sort of make use the string, you tenderize it in boiling, and then you candy it. So texture, aesthetics, and this is where my little movie should have shown you the aesthetics of seaweeds. This is something you also have to appreciate. And because there's so many different kinds of seaweeds, you find them in all sorts of sizes, morphologies, colors, and here's some very beautiful and very delicate red seaweed species from the Japanese cuisine. This is carrageenan, or Condus crispus, in I think three different natural colors. It's from a Canadian company, Acadian Sea Plants, and I mean just looking at it invite you to eat it. It's not in particular interesting taste-wise, but of course that's something you can do with. But at least there's something for the eyes. So you should certainly appreciate it with your eyes. Then taste proper. So now we're going to talk about taste that is taste that happens on the taste buds and the tongue. We say we have 5 basic tastes, and you already heard a lot about kombu. I'm going to invite you to make a dashi on your palate with a piece of kombu. Please pass this around. And if there's something whitish on it, don't worry. It's not fungus. This is actually the salts that precipitates, which Christina and her colleagues have extracted in water and then solidified by boiling or evaporating. So just suck on it. It's pretty hard because it's dry, but try to let your taste bud decide, well, how does this taste? And you only have 5 basic tastes, so it's sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami. And of course, this is about umami. And what I like you to notice that there's something happening once you put it on the palate with your saliva, and then the flavor, the taste develops, has very subtle, very weak marine aromas, which eventually will end up in the dashi. So I have to say a little bit about dashi, because the issue is how do we get umami from seaweeds, and which seaweeds can you get it from, and which seaweeds do not contribute much. So I just tell the old story about Kikuno Iketo, who discovered that in the Japanese kombus, there were high amounts of free glutamate or free glutamic acid, up to 3%. And this is actually now what you have now dissolving on your palate. And so he found out that in the seaweed there's high amounts of monosodium glutamate, and of course that led to the whole sort of later also invention how to make glutamate from hydrolyzing proteins, and later from synthesizing from polysaccharides. So he isolated the molecule and said, now I found the source of taste sensation umai, and coined the word umami. But maybe the more important thing for the green transition, if we can take advantage of, that is that when you make a proper dashi, Nichiban dashi, you combine an extract, an aqueous extract, where you have in your palate here, with another aqueous extract of a fish product, which is a 5 times over preserved, conserved fillet of bonito fish, which is salted, cooked, it's dried, it's fermented, and smoked. And you add flakes of this. You can't eat it after this process. You have to make flakes, and up to about 99% of a compound. It's a precious taste compound in the fish that comes from breakdown of ATP in the muscles of the fish. It seeps out in the water. So in the extract from the seaweed, you add this extract of the fish. And that was found in 1917 to contain high amounts of a free nucleotide, inosinate. And those of you who are vegan know that you can do the same trick with shiitake mushrooms, and that was discovered up in the 50s, 57. There's high levels of another free nucleotide, the granulate, in this fungus, that can do the same trick, enhance the umami sensation in the extract of kombu. So this is an example of the salt that comes out. So this is really the pure version of what Christina showed us, but they've now purified. So this is, of course, a story of MSG. There's a couple of pictures. This is from a chapter I wrote for a book that will be coming out later this year on kombu, all sorts of aspects of kombu, and here you can see the different varieties of the higher level kombus. And in Christina's dashi, you have the Rausu kombu, which is here, and the one you had on your palate is Ma kombu, and you'll now see what the difference is. But just a little bit about umami synergy, which is so important for understanding how you can really make the maximum out of small amounts of marine food to make you eat more green. And so I'll come back to that in the end. We know how it works on the receptor level because we've studied down to molecular and atomic detail. On the receptor, there are 2 binding sites, one for glutamate and a peripheral binding site for free nucleotides. And it's a highly, what is called allosteric action, highly nonlinear mechanism, such that small amounts of one thing can enhance the binding or affinity of the other thing. And everyone who cooks know that this is also the secret when you make sauces and extract. And it can all be presented in a formula, which is describing the effective or equivalent umami concentration by combining the effect of the nucleotides with the effect of the glutamate. Don't worry about the formula. It's a simple nonlinear formula, and it actually has some kind of predictive power. And this is, of course, taken advantage of in the kitchen, not only in the dashi, where you combine a strong glutamate from an extract of kombu, as you have it on your palate, but then combined in with either fish or mushrooms. so, which is a mussel. So you have free inosinate, and you sort of pack it up in seaweeds, and let it sit for a couple of days. It's a classical technique called compogeny. And so now you have synergy that you have the fish with the inosinate, and then it infuses glutamate into the fish. And those of you who have tasted it can tell there's an enormous difference in the flavor of the fish. And here's another example from the Japanese cuisine where there's also some fish product inside. I think in this case it's actually some roe, I think. There was a question, and now we already talked about the question, what could you use the kombu, the leftover kombu, or maybe also fresh kombu for making, using the whole seaweed. And there's a whole range of, I call them condiments in the Japanese cuisine based on kombu that can be simmered in soy sauce, can be in rice vinegar, it can be with all sorts of spices. This is actually an example where there's some of this fish, the katsuobushi, and the flakes together with the seaweed in very small amounts. It's extremely potent. And the reason why I mention this here is that you should think of this as something that has been developed in a food culture where you have to encourage people to eat more plant-based nutrients, and that would be in Asian cuisines, rice. For Danes, you can think of potatoes. And it's not easy to eat a lot of potatoes without, you need a little help. So for Germanic cuisines and Nordic cuisines, what do you do traditionally? You use a little bit of bacon, or a little bit of dry fish, or a little bit of roasted lard that can contribute the umami that the potatoes, even if potatoes have a little umami, but they are missing umami, and it's very much so, certainly with white rice, that is extremely dull and bland unless you umamify it. So, so the whole range of them, and if you ever go to Japan, go and look at the supermarket and you see that there's lines and lines and lines of these products. It's hard to tell what they are, and they may not be able to read what it says, but this is usually something that is extremely delicious, and you're going to have a little taste of that at the end. You're not going to get it now, but I'm going to give you a little piece of shio kombu. After that, you will never forget what umami is, and you will also see how little is needed to boost it. But I have another seaweed, a red seaweed, you're going to taste in between. I don't want to ruin the taste of that. So recently I've been very interested in roe, and this is an interesting example of combining roe with kombu in a very sought after product in Japan, and also in the west coast of North America. Kasunuko is herring roe, and herring can spawn its roe on kombu. And now the combination of roe, which we know because we're doing a project at the moment, University of Copenhagen, it is very high in umami compounds, free nucleotides, actually also glutamate, and together with the seaweed, you have an example of the foodstuff that has been sort of developed to provide for umami synergy by combining the nucleotides and the glutamate. The question that quite often has been asked, and I see many chefs have been asking this question, there's also companies that praise the products that say, well, here's something with umami, and because we added seaweeds. So some years ago, we were provoked by that question and looked at a whole range of different seaweeds, in particular brown seaweeds, and analyzed them for their umami potential as it may be indicated by the content of free glutamate. And here's the data. Don't look at the detail. I'll just point to some of them, but look at the solid bars. And this is the concentration of a dashi made by, you can make it different ways. This is actually a 60-degree aqueous extract, and this is in milligrams per 100 gram, and the taste threshold is in this range here. It can be a little individual. And the whole range of these different seaweeds here, you can't see what they are, but this group here are all the Japanese seaweeds. So we have ma kombu, and the rishi kombu, the roshi kombu, and the hidaka kombu. And then all the rest is very low. Here we have wakame, and some of these are bladder rag, they're kelp, they are ring kelp, the tangle way down. So in terms of glutamate, you would not expect any umami from these seaweeds if it comes to the dashi. There's one exception that we found, and the chefs loved it from the very beginning, and that's the red seaweed dulse, which in this part of the world is very well known, both in Ireland, in Wales, Scotland, Brittany, and not least in Iceland. I was at a conference in Iceland last week, and actually noticed that the Iceland is still sort of interested in eating a seaweed, and it's on it's growing. So dulse. When it comes to umami synthety, as I mentioned to you, there's a glutamate, and then there's a free nucleotide. But there's also another possible component for aspartate. Don't look at the data. Just hear what I say. Makes really no difference in those seaweed we have investigated. So it's mainly glutamate, except in special cases, what I'm going to show you later. And we already heard about nori. That's one exception. And it actually also congo is another exception. Both of these can contribute both glutamate and nucleotides, and together we get this enormous umami synthety. I have a few data I'll show you later. Now, you could then go and ask a taste panel, what do you think? So if you train a taste panel, and this was done at the University of Copenhagen, a colleague of mine, Michael Blomqvist, who then asked the panel to evaluate on a scale from 0 to 10 the umami intensity of dashis from these different seaweeds from the other slide. So this is glutamate concentration, and this is the perceived umami intensity. And so here you find it, the Japanese konbus, they go pretty much similar. They correlate with the umami intensity, correlate with glutamate content. It actually also correlates with price. So the more pricey, it's actually those that gives the higher glutamate. But then you see those down here, bull kelp, apple kelp, two of the giant kelps from the North Pacific, winged kelp, wakame, sugar kelp. The glutamate content would say they're way below the taste intensity of umami, but still the panel assigns some value to it. And in fact, here's a chance to study something that's really we've never started before. That's the interaction, the multimodal interaction between umami taste and olfactory sensation. It's well studied for other basic tastes, that there's an interaction between, for instance, aromas of vanilla and the sweet perception of foodstuff with vanilla. Anyway, our colleague Michael Erlin analyzed the volatile components of seaweeds, and there are a lot of different ones of different kinds. And what it turned out that in these seaweeds where the panel evaluated high umami intensity, there was a sort of a common group of volatiles, and we have no idea how this works. Certainly not on the level of the neural system, but there's some kind of congruency. That is that the brain assigns a higher value to a taste in the presence of aroma compounds. And it's something actually the industry should start looking into, because it may be a way of cranking up the perception of umami using aroma compounds. I have a few other more recent pieces of data from work that was just published by someone else, and come back to it. Actually, they come right here. Sorry, right here. So I would recommend those of you interested in taste of seaweeds and how both olfactory sensation and taste proper, how it's found in a whole range of different, both brown, red, and green seaweeds compared with microalgae. And you can see there's a lot of hydrocarbons that doesn't lead much to the taste, but then a whole range of different aldehydes, ketones and alcohols and so on. And that the message from this paper is that there's really no systematics. So so there are no trends. But maybe more important for this particular talk is that here is these authors they measured both the free amino acids and the free nucleotides. And here you can see data. This is Laminaria Saccharina japonica. They call it the old word here, Laminaria, but that's Saccharina japonica, which is substantial. This is way above the taste threshold, which on this scale is 0.3. This is milligram per gram. The others I had was milligram per 100 gram. And then you can see there's some huge ones here. These are two porphyras. High, and that's because of the acidity. They come way up. And then you have the red seaweed dulse, palmata, which is also very high because of umami acidity, and the other ones here are microalgae. And now I think you should have a taste of the dulse before we go on to the last. I have a piece of dulse for you, which is some of the most Icelandic policy. This is from the please pass it on. It's from Bræðrafjörður. So it's red seaweed. So this is the one that in this kind of sensation. It has been dried, and then I had rehydrated in a humid atmosphere for a couple of days. Mm-hmm. And so it changes the texture. So it has, I think, an interesting texture. And then you can chew it nicely. And I think this is one of the ways one could use dulse in ice creams and in other situation. And we know that is rich in umami. So from this, in this part of the world, the seaweed that has the highest umami potential, that is the dulse, which is also in Danish waters, and Dansk Tang also harvest dulse. Now, just to finish off, since again this is a general talk, together with some Canadian and Spanish colleagues, we have been writing a series of review papers on the uses of seaweeds, and something along the lines of Susan and Stefan also earlier wrote, how seaweeds has really been used by humans for millennia, even maybe longer back than we actually know, to not only for foodstuff and dilation agents, but all sorts of aids to help humans survive. And the story from Chile and the earlier uses of konbu, which I guess, I don't know if you agree with me, that it has along the konbu route, or the seaweed route along the west coast of America, when South America was peopled from the north, it has been something that probably has helped these people to survive and make it all down the continent. So that's a few references. Another few references here, together with Lucas Perez-Lorenz in Cadiz and some Canadian Irish colleague, Pani, whom you just heard on the screen the other day. We have been writing a number of review articles about the gastronomy of seaweed. So I'll finish with a few slides, and I think I then have used my time. This is an example of a dish with carrots. So eat carrots. Well, carrots are not the worst vegetable you can think of, but this is an example we can use. Japanese-inspired condiment is seaweed that has been in this piece of konbu that has been simmered in soy sauce. And here's one from Lars Williams, who I think actually was the first one to make this konbu salt. And if you want to read about how it's done, it's an actual newspaper from 2012. It goes very well with ice cream. That's just as an example. Here's a simple one from a dish with beets cabbage, where bladderwrack has been used to add some interesting texture, and then it's all made in a dashi preparation. And has the dulse been going all the way around? Because then we're ready for the last tasting, and which is something I always use when I talk about umami. Because quite often people say, well, you talk all about this umami and this and that, and say after the talk, but what is it really? And if you had this in the mouth and notice what's happening over the next 10 minutes, you will never be in doubt that the most characteristic signature of umami, that is the lingering. So after the salt has disappeared, the salty taste has disappeared. So there's a seaweed similar in soy sauce. It's called shiu konbu or konbu skudani. And it's something that Minika kindly brought from the Nishiki market in Kyoto. Thank you, Minika. And you should notice how little is needed to provide a great flavor. So this is what is used on top of rice, but you could also just have it as the condiment. And what I'd like you to notice is how little you need to provide big flavor. And this is the way I want to finish off with how you can use this to eat more vegetables. And here's an example of something where I use vegetables where I enhance the texture by Japanese techniques, series of techniques called skimono, where you dry them and then rehydrate them or marinate them, and they turn extremely crunchy and they stay crunchy for a long time. So now you have got a crunchy mouthfeel, great mouthfeel, and then you let them sit in a dashi, in a dashi marinade. So now you've got umami. So now you impart it to these vegetables, these poor vegetables were really are missing from nature. And this you can add to all sorts of other dishes to help more green go down. So this is what I'm interested in the moment, whether you can use insights both from seaweeds, but also other food stuff that is rich in umami to help us eat more green. So since we have prominent visitors from abroad, I'll just mention that there's a trend now in this country, which where we can see that local communities are using seaweed and farming of seaweeds and also blue mussels to build communities, and not least to teach young people and children about the valuable marine environment. And so I think there are now 20-some maritime gardens around Denmark. They're all run by communities. And the interesting thing about these communities, they are communities in cities, both small and big, but cities that are always on the coastline. And in the early days, before the train and cars, the sea cities were faced towards the ocean. It was trade by ships and fisheries. And then after the infrastructure changed, they turned it back to the ocean. And there was nothing any longer that combined people because they were working other places than by the sea. And now these communities sort of bring back the memory of why is it that we developed our community in this particular city. So it's a great, I think it's a great example of how you can build communities. There's a picture from Kerteminde, where I'm part of a maritime garden, where you can see there's installations on the sea, and in fact there are also ways of taking it to a platform near the coast, so children and everyone who are interested can come and see what is being grown in these seaweeds. And I think I have a last for this, no, just a crop. I have another last thing also for the benefit of our visitor from South America. That is that sometimes we quite often ask ourselves, certainly in Denmark, how come we don't eat more seaweeds? And certainly in countries like Denmark, we are blessed with a lot of seaweeds, even if we don't see that many species at the coast. And of course, much more in other islands, but it seems to be very little, probably even less than you mentioned in Chile. And what was interesting is that just I think last year there was a paper. Those of you in seaweeds and haven't seen this paper, you should read it. It's about the human consumption of seaweed and freshwater aquatic plants in ancient Europe. And what these are archaeologists who I think at 20-some locations around European coast have analyzed what's called the dental calculus on teeth. So it's hard to tell what people have been eating just by looking at the isotope composition on the bones, because it could come from another species in between. For instance, maybe if they have composition like seaweeds, but if the seaweeds had been eaten by snails and humans have eaten the snails, you couldn't tell the difference. But here's actually on the remains on the teeth, and there are all these different locations, and it's from the Mesolithic up into early Middle Ages. So no one should say that people in Europe haven't eaten seaweeds. We just not recorded it. We just don't remember. And the one single place that has been analyzed in Denmark just happens to have no seaweeds. But I think based on this data, I think the most unlikely thing is that people haven't eaten seaweed. So let that be my bottom line. We've forgotten to eat it. Now is the time to do it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Now it's time for questions. You have any questions, Professor Mouritsen?
I just have a comment. I really liked the slide when we were talking about that we tried to do dashi with other types of algae, like local farm algae, like you put numbers into and we can see like in the rows, the combo that we use is actually with the highest glutamate, which is I think also a problem for us because we would like to be more sustainable in traveling all the way, like kombu from Japan to make our products here is a big issue for us and like a big challenge in the future if we want to do something about it. But yeah, it was very interesting.
But it is a concern if you want to really use which I think the best Japanese secret or Noma secret is to use umami or umamification to making delicious food, and in particular if you want to make more green food delicious, you have to look carefully when it comes to seaweeds.
Yeah.
But that's why also in recent years I've got an interest in other parts of the ocean, which we certainly in this part of the world also are basically neglecting. But they're there. For instance, squid, and recently I've got interest in fish roe. All fish are roe. Most of it is cut away in this country, and you turn it into meal for pigs. Yeah. So we waste a lot of marine resources by putting them through other organisms. So the best bit I have when it comes to umami acid can be detected from glutamate. That's stalls in our environment. There's nothing in sugar kelp, at least what we know of. But of course, that I should be careful, and maybe Suzanne can add something here, because we have to realize it has not been optimized in any way. I mean, we get what is farmed or what we can pick, and we know it depends on the composition depends on the access of say, nitrogen, and depends on when you harvest it during the growing season. I think there's probably pretty little done in terms of breeding. So think about it, we go back to before agriculture, and there was also what we could get. There was poor foodstuff compared to what we now have with enriched nutrients, because we have genetically modified, or nature genetically modified. So I think we still have interesting things to see when biologists start breeding seaweeds and maybe even genetically modifying in a way that we can agree with. So I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be possible. And actually leads to the question I'll ask also this audience: why is there so much free glutamate in the kombu?
I want to ask something actually related to.
So if anyone knows the question, a lot of arguments, how come? And there's no other. I found no other pure material. You have to ferment to get more in a pure ingredient. No other food ingredient than kombu has as much free glutamate in its natural state. And by the way, it's not when it's fresh. It's in the second year. It's only in the second year growth, and then probably not much is happening during storage. It's other things with odor that happens during storage.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask you about that. Like, when it is harvested, do you know if the glutamate evolves throughout the aging process, or is it like is there actually glutamate or that much glutamate when it's harvested fresh,
Yeah.
or does it evolve? And
Good question, and it's not in the, and that data is in a Japanese,
Yeah.
in a Japanese thesis by Kumiko Ninomaya,
Mhm.
who's used to be director of the Normal Information Center. I know her quite well. I asked her that question many times, and well, she says it's in my thesis, and I told her you should publish it. But what she says is that the first year, you only harvest second year kombu,
Mhm.
and at that stage it has developed the free glutamate,
Mhm.
and it will not change during storage. Usually you would, after drying, you will store it at least 2 years, and the best quality is 10 years. And what's believed to happen during that process, or known happening, is that the marine aromas, they sort of disappear. It's getting much more mild. So if you compare a more or less aged kombu or dashi from kombu in terms of umami, it's because you focus attention on umami when the other sensory cues are dampened.
Mhm.
She says, Kumiko-san says, there's no change in glutamate concentration after. And then after it's been harvested the second year.
Okay.
And dried.
Mhm.
So it does not develop in the warehouse.
I wasn't sure if because like one of our questions is, can we find a species local that is similar to kombu enough?
Yeah.
That, and is it maybe the processing rather than the heart, like
Yeah.
than the
I think one should experiment with it.
Yeah.
I mean, immediately you jump to sugar kelp, Saccharania
Yeah.
platysimate, because it's the closest we have here. But all measurements and dried, but I have to say this is not done systematically. It's done, but we've got some of it is farmed and some of it is in wild, and we really don't know much about the preparation.
Mhm.
So it's something I think is worthwhile doing.
Mhm.
I would still start with dolls, and also trying to figure out maybe that's happening something to the maturation of dolls that makes it so powerful. I know no data that, well, I know for in fact, there is some data from the Norwegian group on aged dolls. I think it's the same thing. It doesn't develop during aging. I have to check it.
I think we have a Stefan.
Yeah, I just want to read from the chat here. So she wrote that a long time ago. Alicia, again from Australia, Deakin University. Kombu is also used to aid preservation, antibacterial or antiviral, as well as flavor in Japanese sukemono, some pickles. And then, and similarly, the sukudane helps to preserve rice, which spoils very quickly when they pack lunches, etc., without refrigeration. So you can also use it not just for the flavor, but also for preservation.
And
So
that,
that was just
and of course, you know, there's a lot of bioactive compounds. Some of only some of them we know, and we certainly know from traditional uses that it can work as an antifungal, antiseptic, antibacterial.
from other studies, right?
Yeah, from other
especially the iodine as well, because in Spain at least, in the north in Galicia, there's these, I don't know, I'm not a specialist unfortunately on seaweed as you guys are, so don't know all the names, but there's these seaweed that it's left on the beaches, and traditionally if you have like these type of like mouth
blisters.
yes,
Yes.
or you actually pick one of those and rub it in your, and it's like something very
Dumontia.
What?
When?
Dumontia.
Dumontia.
That is the one with the antiviral working. April, May is when it grows in rock pools and stuff like that. But no, I just want to thank Ole. And again, it is such a pleasure to listen to you. And immediately I'm very enthusiastic going downstairs to the kitchen and start cooking. But what I understand from your story is that I've kind of been looking at the wrong seaweed. And I should basically use the dulse, Palmaria, for getting the most effect out of the umami. So that will change. But coming back to your thing on breeding, and I think this is the biggest difference between what we have in Europe and what is happening in Asia, because they've been breeding since the 50s and getting certain strains to grow fast to give the right taste umami flavors in the product and started cultivating this for the last 30-40 years. We've just started here with one species, and I've done hybridization in the 90s with Alaria, with the winged kelp, and creating certain strains that were 3-4 meters in length and half a meter wide. And already between those different strains, you could taste differences in mouthfeel, in the taste elements. But then, of course, we moved with the Kyoto Protocol. We couldn't do anything anymore, and you just have to use local strains. So you're restricted in what you can do nowadays in cultivating. That is one thing. The other thing with the glutamate, you say in the second year, it is particularly starting to develop, and it is high and it stays in there. And it is funny, why is in kombu glutamate so high? But the general question is also for kelps, why is iodine so high? Because there is some element in the kelp, and it is an analogue with human beings. We have an iodine importer. Kelp has that as well. And they bring iodine over the cell membrane up to 1,000,000-fold from the original seawater. So there is elements and systems in these seaweeds we still don't understand. And if there is a link or not, and you say the second year, a lot of people measure the iodine in year 1 because it's still very low, and then they don't have to declare it. So there is all these kind of systems happening. And that's, yeah, I don't know. That still needs research, I think, Ole. But with the Palmaria, I'm very happy because I still have 40 kilos in my attic. I better start using that now.
Maybe one comment on the iodine. Unfortunately, it's such that for the Japanese kombus, the part where you have the highest amount of iodine is close to the stipe, and this is also the growth zone. And I think some have proposed that iodine is a growth factor. I am not able to judge that. Another thing has been proposed is that iodine is also helping is an antioxidant. So you will find the best for dashi is close to the stipe, but that's also the part that has the highest iodine.
Pleasure and sin, right?
Yeah.
So there's one more question from Marta Blickler.
Hi. I was just wanting to comment on the iodine, but Ole already mentioned it, that iodine is an inorganic antioxidant in some brown algae, at least. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan?
Yeah, no, actually, it's the ancient evolutionary first antioxidant that ever existed, iodine. When life started from the ocean and going to land, and later on new elements and new things were produced, but iodine, yeah, it's evolutionary seen the first antioxidant.
Thank you.
So maybe before, did you like the last piece?
Really good.
I'm still having the
I found no one who doesn't like it. And it's such a simple thing, and it's sort of something we could easily transfer from other food cultures to help us add something to our green cuisine. And I hope you noticed that there was, once you put it on the palate, you could obviously taste salt. Did you notice something with your saliva?
Yeah.
It's flushing. Umami is a signal to the body now food is on the way, and maybe it is on its way for lunch. It's releasing saliva. It helps mastication. It's the first is part of actual mastication and eating. It's extremely important for people that dry mouth. So it could be elderly people in dementia or people who have been in chemotherapy. This can be a starter, and I know it's being used by Japanese dentists to help people who are incapacitated in certain ways in the palate. They drink a cup of kombucha, which is really what you have in your mouth here. And you should also notice the lingering. The salt goes up like that and it disappears, but then you touch the other thing that is in the palate and fills the whole cavity. That's the distinct feature for umami. builds up very slowly and stays around for a long time. And I think that's why the Japanese would call it umai. It's delicious.
So you posted a question before. Why does seaweed have more
Yeah.
glutamate? Do you know the answer?
I don't know the answer.
I was hoping you would tell the answer again.
I'm still expecting for an answer here. More research is needed.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Professor Ole Mouritsen, and thank you so much for all the speakers. It was a really nice seminar, and thank you so much for attending. Here there is a present for the speakers. It was signed by the chef. I don't know if you have more information.
Yeah,
Like,
so
yeah.
the best chef in Ireland, Aisling Moore, she has a restaurant called Goldie, and she has made this book recently.
Thank you so
And
much.
there's a special signature and small message on the front page for
Thank
you. Speakers.